Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's coming up to midday here. Let's take a look at Big Ben. It's a pretty humid, cloudy day here in London. Prime Minister's question's on its way, though it doesn't actually feature the Prime Minister or the Leader of the Opposition. But Laura Kuenssberg is here. What's going to be on the agenda, do we think?
Well, I think one of the strange things about today is going to add to the rather kind of weird atmosphere around at the moment. There's almost a kind of sense of nothingness going on in Parliament, I have to say. There's very little going through the House before the end of the session.
Very cool.
Normally, this might be a period where the government's trying to ram
Just trying to get everything through.
Wash up, as you know, tomorrow, for example, the repeal bill, which is a really big, important piece of legislation, is going to be put forward. But actually, people are trying to dampen expectations of what actually will be in it, or it's going to be very much process. So I think this is going to be a bit strange today, frankly, not least because of the characters who probably many of our audience and a lot of the audience politically aren't necessarily that familiar with. So Damian Green, though, hugely important, de facto Theresa May's deputy, will be put through his paces by Emily Thornberry, obviously a key ally of Jeremy Corbyn.
And David, there's some crucial economic data out today as another pretty healthy fall in unemployment. Employment is 324,000 up on last year, which is the largest on record. But average earnings are only rising by 1.8% at a time when inflation is rising at 3%. Now, what is the thought in government that at a time of essentially full employment by the employment figures, wages are rising so slowly? Why?
I think it's clearly a complex issue, and it's difficult to put your finger precisely on what it is. I mean, some of this is about the fact that inflation has spiked, and that's followed the fall in the pound last year, and certainly the Bank of England thinks that.
But average earnings are falling. They're down 0.5% in real terms on the year. Why? At a time when employment continues to rise, the labour market tightens. Why are average earnings, the rate of increase, why is it slowing down?
No, as I say, I think it's a difficult one to say, certainly in terms of what's happened in the past. Yeah, we are looking, of course, at
because it's quite crucial to your economic strategy.
Look, I mean, what we know is what drives, in the long term, what drives up wages and salaries is improved productivity. And clearly we need to do, as a country, we don't perform as well on productivity as we should do. So, policies like having, business-friendly tax environment to attract investment, improving our infrastructure, improving our skills.
Yeah, but you've been in power for 7 years
all
to
of
do
the things.
that.
Well, a lot of these things. Our productivity challenge is one that has existed for decades.
Right. But shouldn't you be looking at, first of all, trying to understand this, and then looking at ways, if you want to keep the economy growing, and consumer spending accounts for 68% of our GDP, you need to go and find ways of pumping up wages. Why are you not doing that?
Well, of course, we have got a national living wage.
Yeah, but that's taken into account in these
figures. It has, but it has meant actually those who've seen their wages rise the most are those who are low paid, and that's where actually we've made the most progress.
But there's a real squeeze on earnings at the moment, and it's undermining growth. You see that in the GDP figures.
But I come back to the point. In the long term, as you well know, what drives up wages and salaries is improved productivity.
And as Keynes said, in the long term, we're all dead.
Well,
including those whose wages are only rising by 1.8. Is there not a sense of urgency in the government at the moment about this?
Well, look, of course, but.
Well, it doesn't seem like it.
But, just to make the point, very often politicians are criticised for finding, short-term answers and to long-term solutions.
Yeah, but this phenomenon has been around for a long time.
It has, and that's why, come back to skills, it comes back to infrastructure, it does come back actually to attracting investment to the UK, which
none of that's going to happen overnight.
But there's a lot of work that we've already done, and we need to continue to go down that path.
Jack Dromey, it isn't just a British phenomenon, though. America and Germany have pretty much full employment too.
Yes.
And wages there, for unaccountable reasons as well, are growing very slowly. Something is happening to the normal economic equation that when labour markets get tight, wages get stronger.
I think you make a very good point. First of all, the government's got to stop talking. Matthew Taylor said this yesterday about quantity of jobs and start talking about quality of jobs. But it's then what you do in practical terms. Now, I accept the point that there are some deep-seated long-term problems, for example, in relation to productivity. But two things that would happen right now that to give Britain a pay rise. First of all, if you remove the 1% cap on public sector pay. But secondly, were you to go down the path of what we propose, I was a founder member of the Drive for the Living Wage. It's significantly to increase the living wage. Good for the worker, good for the worker's family because they're not having to do 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet. Good for the employer because all the evidence is that the individuals concerned are more productive, less turnover of labour. Good for local economies because low-paid workers don't salt their money away in Swiss bank accounts, they spend it locally. And good for the taxpayer because workers are claiming less and paying more taxes. So there are some things that you could do very quickly indeed that would make a real difference.
Laura, is this going to come up today, do you think?
Well, it may well come up today, but I think just to reflect a little bit on it, one of the interesting things is I think this is what some Conservatives now understand they missed during the election campaign. So figures like this always deal with what's happened in the last quarter or what's happened in the last couple of months. The Tories are very proud of the record of numbers of jobs that have been created during their time. But one thing that I think surprised them on the doorstep and they hadn't perhaps factored in during the election campaign was the fact that lots of people are starting to feel a bit hard up. That misery gap, as you call it, the difference between the rate of pay increase and the rate of inflation, as inflation spiked earlier this year, is something we hadn't seen for a while in this country. And of course, for any government of the day, if people are feeling week by week, month by month, that they are worse off, they are going to punish the people who are in charge.
Absolutely right.
The other thing I think hasn't been mentioned that actually one of my sources in the
Actually, we're going to have to leave that other thing to the moment, Laura.
We'll come back
straight to the Commons. We'll come back.
Mr. Damian Green.
Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to reply. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is in attendance on Her Majesty the Queen, welcoming their Majesties King Felipe and Queen Letizia of Spain on their state visit to the United Kingdom. I'm sure the whole House wishes them well.
Caroline Flint.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't today's report that National Grid made £3 billion profit in 2015-16 at the expense of households further evidence that the government is not delivering fair energy prices? Will the government agree to an immediate rebate for overcharging, and will the government now commit to an energy price cap for the 17 million households on the most expensive tariffs?
The Right Honourable Lady is right to identify the issue of energy prices, and I'm sure she will welcome the announcement in the Queen's speech that the government will ensure fairer markets for consumers, and that this will include bringing forward measures to help tackle unfair practices in the energy market, to help reduce energy bills. I'm sure this is an issue on which we can work across the House together.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday you kindly hosted 2 important talks on the future of health and social care and their funding, including one by my honourable friend for Totnes. My right honourable friend knows that the NHS in Staffordshire and Stoke is delivering fine care, but under great financial pressure in common with other parts of the country. Can I encourage the government to bring together people from across this House to make this Parliament the one which puts the NHS and social care on a firm and sustainable foundation?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and I know he's been campaigning vigorously on behalf of health service in his constituency, including his local hospital, and he's absolutely right to do so. He and I'm sure, both welcome the fact that the government has committed an extra £8 billion over this Parliament to the NHS, and we're also committed to having a full debate across the House and indeed much wider with people about how we can improve our social care system, because this is indeed one of the big issues facing this country.
Emily Thornberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me welcome the First Secretary to his new role. By my reckoning, in the 20 years since he first joined this House, he is the 16th member of the party opposite to be represented at Prime Minister's questions. So how about I give him till the end of this session to be able to name all the others? In the meantime, I'm sure that he and the whole House will join me in congratulating Joe Conter and the British and Irish Lions on their historic achievement of recent days. Mr. Speaker, on the subject of British and Irish cooperation, the First Secretary has huge expertise on the practicalities of the common travel area. On that basis, can he tell the House what will happen to the Irish land border if no deal is reached between Britain and Europe by the end of March 2019?
I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for her kind remarks. I might take up her offer to try and name all 16 in the tea room later, rather than delay the House now. There are many, many distinguished people of both sexes who've done it in this party, because we, of course, elect women leaders occasionally. I also absolutely share her view about the British and Irish Lions, though it strikes me as a particularly British thing to do to celebrate a drawn series quite as hard as we have, but nevertheless that's the way we do sport, and indeed you, I know, Mr. Speaker, will be very keen on following Joe Conter's progress through Wimbledon, as well as Andy Murray. Let's hope we have two finalists over the weekend. On the substantive question she asked about the Irish border, she will know that it is the aim of this government to make sure that we get the best deal for Britain, and as the Prime Minister set out in her Lancaster House speech, one of the key issues which we want to bring forward and have brought forward at the start of the negotiations is precisely the issue of the Irish border, because it is extremely important not just for our own citizens in Northern Ireland, but for the Irish Republic, that we get that right. And indeed, I have already had meetings with my opposite number, the Taoiseach, on this matter and other matters.
Emily Thornberry.
I mentioned at the outset that he's a 16th member to represent his party in Prime Minister's questions since 1997. Only 3 of those have been women, and the last one before the current Prime Minister was 16 years ago. I believe we've had 3 women Labour MPs doing this job in the last 2 years alone. My question was not, what deal do we hope to get? My question was not what deal do we hope to get, but what happens if we get no deal at all? This isn't some sinister nightmare dreamt up by Remainers. It was the Prime Minister who first floated the idea of no deal, the Foreign Secretary who said it would be perfectly okay, the Brexit Secretary who said that we'd be prepared to walk away. But since the election, the Chancellor has said that that would be a very, very bad outcome, and a former minister has told Sky News that no deal is dead. So will the First Secretary clear this up? Are ministers just making it up as they're going along? Or is it still the government's clear policy that no deal is an option?
I recommend the Right Honourable Lady read the Prime Minister's Lancaster House speech. That is the basis on which we're negotiating. But we're also saying that it is conceivable that we would be offered a kind of punishment deal that would be worse than no deal. It is not our intention. We want to have a deal. We want to have a good deal. Can I also point out to her that it is her leader and her party's position that whatever is on offer, they will accept it. That is a terrible way. That is a terrible way to go into a negotiation, and all I can congratulate them on is their consistency. They have been consistently in favour of unilateral disarmament. They don't only apply that in military matters, they clearly apply it in matters of negotiation on Britain's future prosperity as well.
Well, the First Secretary apparently didn't get the Prime Minister's memo. You're supposed to be building consensus, man. And if we ignore the political bluster, got the political bluster. I think what we heard was that no deal is indeed still an option. And if that is the case, can we turn to what I might call the East India Club question? Because before the member for Newton Abbot suddenly turned herself into Nick Griffin, this was the question that she was trying to ask. What does no deal actually mean for our businesses, for our people, and for issues such as the Irish land border? So, can the First Secretary address this question now? What does no deal look like in practice?
I'm very happy to address her first point about consensus. I'm always, as you know, a moderate person keen on consensus, and so I very much look forward to sharing the Labour Party's views this morning on the unemployment figures. Unemployment is now down to its lowest level since the early 70s. There are many members of this House who weren't born when unemployment was as low as this government has made it. I would hope that she can bring herself, in the course of her questions, actually to welcome lower unemployment. On the substance of her question, as she knows, we are seeking a good deal for Britain that will enable us to trade as freely as possible with the European Union to protect our prosperity, at the same time as getting trade deals with other important markets around the world. In the last week alone, both the United States and Australia have said they would like to sign trade deals with Britain as fast as possible. So I'm happy to report to her that negotiations are going well and that her fear of no deal is probably overstated.
Thornberry!
If he wants to talk about unemployment, let me ask him specifically, will he publish the Treasury's assessment of the impact of the no deal outcome would have on jobs and growth in Britain? Will he publish that today? I didn't think so. So let's continue. So if the First Secretary won't tell the House what no...
Order, the Honourable Lady must be heard, and she will be, as will First Secretary Green. Members must calm themselves. Emily Thornberry.
Much, Mr. Speaker. If the First Secretary won't tell the House what no deal means, can he at least clear up the confusion over whether a plan for no deal actually exists? Because yesterday, the Foreign Secretary told me that indeed there was no plan for no deal. 2 hours later, Number 10 fought back, and they said there was a plan. The Brexit Secretary might be laughing, but I'm turning to him next, because the Brexit... The Brexit Secretary was so busy fighting with himself that on March the 12th, he said that there was a plan. On March the 17th, he said that there wasn't. On May the 19th, he said he spent half his time thinking about it. And yesterday, he said that he wasn't prepared to comment. So, can the First Secretary clear up the confusion today? Is there a contingency plan for no deal, or isn't there? And if there is, will he undertake to publish it?
The Honourable Lady says she's happy to talk about unemployment. I notice she can't bring herself to welcome falling unemployment figures. We will clearly have to try harder to establish consensus on what I would hope would be something that genuinely unites all sides of this House. On the issue of the report, the OBR is publishing its fiscal risks report tomorrow. So if she can be patient, she will see the report she wants.
Emily Thornberry!
So let's be clear. The First Secretary seems to be saying that no deal is still on the table, but he won't say what it means. And there is a no-deal contingency plan, but he's not going to publish it. This really is 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. After all, if the government seriously wants open cross-party debate about the best way forward for Brexit, surely they have to spell out what all the options look like. So can the First Secretary at least provide some clarity on one issue, and let's try and make some progress today? He has said repeatedly that we want to avoid a cliff-edge Brexit. But under a no-deal scenario, he knows that that must be impossible. Because the Prime Minister can hardly storm out of the negotiating room saying that she won't accept the deal and then pop her head round the door again and say, can she have 2 more years to prepare? Because that's not how it works. So does he accept no deal also means no transitional arrangements?
Let me try even harder to establish consensus with the Right Honourable Lady. I think we both want a deal. I hope she will agree to that she wants a deal at the end of this. And the reason why I am optimistic that because of our negotiating stance and the position set out by the Prime Minister, we will get a deal, is that we have, for example, made a fair and realistic offer about citizenship to try and remove that problem from the equations. That is a first indication of how we will approach these negotiations. We approach them in a positive state, and we believe that it is not just in the interests of Great Britain, but also in the interests of the other member states of the European Union to reach a deal with what is one of their biggest trading partners. So it is in everyone's interest to reach this deal, and frankly, she said nothing constructive that might contribute to a deal so far, but I will give her another chance.
Emily Thornberry!
I know the Right Honourable Gentleman is new to this, but the way the rules work...
Order. I don't know whether it's spontaneous or orchestrated, and I don't really care which. But whichever it is, the idea that it's going to stop the Honourable Lady asking her questions is for the birds. So members are wasting their vocal cords. We will carry on as long as necessary to accommodate the backbench members whom I wish to accommodate. Emily Thornberry.
Yeah, I know that the honourable member is new to this, but the way that it works is I ask the questions and he answers them. And we're quite happy to swap places with them. And frankly, if he doesn't want to continue under these rules, I'm sure there's plenty of other people on the front bench there who'd love the opportunity to audition as Prime Minister. But I do appreciate all the First Secretary's answers, but they do just serve to illustrate what a mess the government has got itself into by threatening to walk away even before talks began. Isn't the truth now that we've got a no-deal option on the table, but they won't tell us what that means? They've got contingency plans, but they won't let the public see them. We've got a Chancellor demanding transitional arrangements, which a no-deal option makes impossible. We've got a Foreign Secretary making it up as he's going along. We've got a Brexit Secretary so used to overruling his colleagues that he started overruling himself. And we've got a Prime Minister who's so bereft of ideas that she started putting suggestion boxes around Parliament. But as a country, we have got 20 months to go until Brexit. We absolutely have got to get a grip. And if the party opposite hasn't got the strength for the task, then we've absolutely got to get rid of them.
I think there may have been a question somewhere in that. Can I assure the Right Honourable Lady of 2 things? First of all, that this government is already in the negotiations. She will have seen that. We have started negotiations. They are going well. We said that the first thing we wanted to do was negotiate citizens' rights. That was the first item on the agenda of the first meeting. We want to make sure that European citizens in this country, and equally importantly, British citizens living in other European countries, have as much certainty about their rights as soon as possible. That is what we are negotiating. That is the sign of a practical, pragmatic government getting on with work in the interests of the British people. What we would have, as we've seen from the Labour Party, they've so far, I've counted, had 9 different plans on Europe. They want to be both in and out of the single market, in and out of the customs union. They said they wanted to remain. They voted for Article 50. They split their party on that. And she made one point about whether she would prefer to be at this dispatch box rather than at that dispatch box. I would also remind her of the other event that's happened recently where the Conservative Party got more votes and more seats than the Labour Party and won the election.
David Morris!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I do welcome the jobs that have been announced. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, after 65 years, in my constituency of talking about a link road, one actually occurred on my watch. And furthermore, there's an enterprise zone stroke business park that I'm trying to attain, and we've had a very productive meeting with the Powerhouse Minister yesterday, and also the First Minister of the Isle of Man, who I do believe is here today. And would my right honourable friend help in any way possible to ensure that this business park does become a reality to create more jobs in Morecambe and Lonsdale?
I agree with my honourable friend. He'll be interested to know that in the northwest of England, employment has increased by 2.5% over the past year, and the Labour benches may wish to welcome that rather than just heckle it. He's absolutely right to highlight the importance of having business parks and enterprise zones as drivers for economic growth. I wish him well in his campaign, and I'm sure my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, would be happy to look into the matter.
Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House would want to join with me and my colleagues in marking the 22nd anniversary of the sad events in Srebrenica and thank those that held the memorial last night in London to make sure that we never forget. Mr. Speaker, will the First Secretary of State confirm that the devolved administrations will not face a diminution of powers as a result of the repeal bill?
I joined the honourable gentleman in commemorating the dreadful events at Srebrenica, and I'm happy to reconfirm what my right honourable friend the Prime Minister and others have said, that yes, under the terms of the Brexit deal that we will negotiate, that there will be no diminution of the devolved administration's powers, and indeed that we look to devolve more powers as a result of this process.
Ian Blackford.
I thank the First Secretary of State for that answer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the First Secretary of State for that answer. Will he confirm that there will be a cast-iron guarantee that all powers that come back into the United Kingdom on devolved matters will be returned? And furthermore, does the United Kingdom Government intend to amend Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act to change any aspect of the devolved competencies that were approved with the Scottish referendum in 1997?
As I've said, I can only keep repeating the assurances we've already given. I'm slightly surprised at the Scottish nationalists' approach, in that my understanding of their position is that they want the powers taken from London to Edinburgh so they can give them back to Brussels. As I understand it, that's their position, but perhaps their inability to explain the logic of that position might explain the recent general election result they have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, a brilliant new hospital, St Luke's, opened in my constituency. But the old cottage hospital, which it replaces, contains an important and unique war memorial. Will the First Secretary agree with me that however the NHS redevelops that site, it's vital that that war memorial is preserved in a fitting way so that future generations can remember the sacrifices of those who came before us?
I think perhaps particularly at the moment when we are about to commemorate the centenary of the terrible Battle of Passchendaele, it's very important that we consider the issues of war memorials. Memorials like the one he mentions call on us to remember the horrors of war and honour the memories of those who died. In this case, I understand that the War Memorial is protected by a Historic England Grade 2 listing, and so specific planning consent would be required to relocate the memorial as part of any future plans. I hope that will provide the protection he and his constituents need.
My constituent has serious mental ill health and has had over 50 separate admissions to psychiatric care. She requires regular monitoring to prevent her condition worsening and becoming a danger to herself and others. Now, she could access support under DLA, but stands to lose £110 per week under PIP. As former DWP Secretary of State, will he look urgently at this case and change the loophole in PIP that leaves very vulnerable people without the continual support that keeps them safe?
Well, I mean, obviously, the House will be concerned to hear about the case of her constituent, as I am, and she will know that one of the effects of the transition from DLA to PIP is that more people are now eligible for support that were under support, particularly those, as it happens, with mental health problems. So, but but the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions will have heard her point, and I've no doubt if she contacts him, he will look into the case personally.
Kit Malthouse.
Mr. Speaker, some of the most distressing cases that I and other members see in my constituency surgery, those involving domestic violence. The Queen's speech has promised a bill to help strengthen our confrontation of this problem. So I wonder if the Deputy Prime Minister, First Secretary, could tell us when we can expect this legislation, urgently needed as it is, and what the government is doing about this problem while we await it.
Well, I agree. This is a hugely important issue, and he's right. We've committed in the Queen's speech to introduce a domestic abuse bill in this session, which I hope will be a landmark in this very important area. What we want to do in the bill is set in motion a transformation not just to protect and support victims, but to recognise the lifelong impact domestic abuse can have on children, and to make sure that the agencies respond effectively to domestic abuse. We'll, of course, be consulting with all the relevant professions and voluntary groups on this, but we are absolutely determined to press ahead with this very, very important legislation.
Jarvis.
Little Max Johnson is 9. He's in hospital and he's urgently waiting for a heart transplant. His mum, Emma, and his brother Harry join us today to support Max, but also the 10,000 people around the country who need an organ transplant. We can do more to help them. In Wales, they've already moved to the opt-out system, and Scotland plan to do the same. So can the First Secretary of State say whether he agrees with me that in England we should change the law to one of presumed consent for organ donation to give Max and all those other people the best chance of life?
I'm sure that the thoughts of members across the House are with Max and his family at this incredibly difficult time, and I agree with him that organ donation is clearly a hugely important part of our system, and I'm pleased that there are now more than 23 million people on the organ donor register, and over the past year we saw the highest ever donor and transplant rates in the UK. But of course there is more that can be done, and as he says, the law is different in other territories inside the UK. And absolutely, I can commit the Department of Health is looking at the impact of those changes to see if days can give rise to further improvements in the number of available organs we have.
Mr. Graham Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is my friend aware that the Greater Manchester Chamber's quarterly economic survey predicts economic growth at 3.25% annually, as it has been broadly since 2013? Is he further aware that Manchester Airport is planning a £1 billion investment in the coming years? Doesn't this indicate a welcome rebalancing of the economy underpinned by sound economic management? And will he undertake to continue that sound economic management that's so necessary to our country?
My honourable friend makes a number of important points, particularly about Manchester Airport, which I know has been a significant driver of the excellent growth figures of the increasingly excellent economy of Manchester and the surrounding areas. Everything he says is true, and I think it is a tribute to the work that's been done on the Northern Powerhouse that we are now spreading that prosperity across the north of England.
Dr. Rupa Huck.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The First Secretary said the other day that we need to have a national debate on tuition fees, and he admitted that student debt is a huge issue. With the PM touting for ideas, can I recommend page 43 of our manifesto and ask that they adopt Labour's pledge to abolish tuition fees?
I don't remember the contents of page 43, so I'd quite like to hear this.
Mr. Speaker, can I recommend that they consult page 43 of our manifesto and commit to Labour's policy of the abolition of tuition fees?
People often stand at this dispatch box and say, I'm pleased she raised that question. I'm genuinely pleased she raised that question, because it allows me to point out the very slight problem with her argument, which is that her own education spokesman has admitted that the tuition fees policy has a 100 billion... She has admitted that there is a £100 billion hole, black hole, in Labour's student fees policy. That's as much money, nearly, as we spend on the NHS in a year. That's 2 years' worth of disability benefits. Labour in this area were particularly incredible at the general election. I'm astonished they want to bring it up at Prime Minister's questions. And I would remind them in particular that misleading students and young people is a very dangerous thing to do. If they don't believe me, they could ask the Liberal Democrats.
Mr. Speaker, just 1 in 5 of our public art sculptures and statues is of a woman. Next week, to mark 200 years since the death of the world-renowned novelist Jane Austen, the first ever sculpture of her will be unveiled in my constituency, Basingstoke, the borough of her birth, the county that inspired her. Will my right honourable friend join me in calling for more places to do what Basingstoke has and celebrate their famous daughters?
I'm delighted to echo my right honourable friend's call to welcome this new statue of Jane Austen in Basingstoke. I'm genuinely astonished that there isn't a statue of Jane Austen anywhere else around the country. One of our greatest authors and still popular 200 years since her birth. And I would be very, very happy also to echo her desire to have more statues of Britain's greatest women spread around the country.
Davy Perkins.
Mr. Speaker, politicians are said to be here today and gone tomorrow, but whatever tomorrow may bring, the Prime Minister isn't even here today to mark the end of her first year in power. And I note for the first time since she's become Prime Minister that listen, you might like to hear this. For the first time since she's become Prime Minister, her image has now been removed from the front page of the Conservative Party website. So, can the First Secretary tell us why she has gone from being the next Iron Lady to the Lady Vanishes?
The honourable gentleman is ingenious in asking very personal questions, and I commend him for it. Unfortunately, he has got his own record on this subject. As recently as June last year, the honourable gentleman said that the leader of the Labour Party is not destined to become Prime Minister, and he called on him to resign. I suggest he might want to make peace with his own front bench before he starts being rude about ours.
Today's jobs figures show that we have the highest employment rate since comparable records began. We have more people in full-time employment, and we are touching on the lowest youth unemployment since records began. In light of the Matthew Taylor Review and the modern working practices, what more can be done to ensure that this record continues and that low youth unemployment continues and we rid this country of that scourge?
My honourable friend is exactly right, specifically on the subject of youth unemployment. One of the particularly welcome figures of the consistently low and falling unemployment figures over which this government has presided is the fact that youth unemployment is now at historically low levels and lower than many other comparable economies. We will continue this not just with our moves on more apprenticeships in this Parliament, but also with the introduction of new and better technical and vocational education, which is key to providing long-term prosperity, not just for the economy as a whole, but for everyone in this country.
Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How can the government continue to justify not providing fair and equitable funding arrangements for West Lancashire to support water level management organisation, otherwise known as drainage boards, to help protect homes and the agriculture and horticulture industries critical to the local economy, instead of causing EA to threaten to turn off the Alt Crosslands pumping station?
The honourable lady raises a reasonable point about the Environment Agency. It is the Environment Agency's duty to ensure that water supplies are good and safe. And I'm sure if she wishes to bring this issue up with my right honourable friend, the DEFRA Secretary, he would be happy to talk to her about it.
Andrew Salou.
Zero energy bill homes at below market prices are being built by British architect Bill Dunster with the support of the building research establishment. Given their potential to help people find affordable housing, what more can the government do to help expand this type of housing as part of our commitment to both enterprise and social justice?
Well, I know my honourable friend is an energetic campaigner for social justice, and this is a very good example of how having a dynamic and flexible economy is not just good for the economy, it's actually good for the whole of society. And I'm happy to join him in welcoming this type of innovation. The Bill Dunster's firm is a good example of such innovation, and I know that it's been supported by the government's enterprise investment scheme, so the government is doing its best to support this type of measure, and we're stimulating the growth of the off-site construction sector, which enables more houses to be built through our accelerated construction programme and the Home Building Fund. This is another very important issue to make sure that we spread the benefits of prosperity around this country.
Tim Farron.
Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the First Secretary might imagine what it feels like to be a parent forced to uproot their children from their once settled home to flee war and persecution, as millions of refugees around the world have done. And then would he imagine further how it might feel for those who become separated from their family members, with one family member making it, for instance, to the United Kingdom, needlessly kept apart from their families due to cruel and unnecessary barriers to family reunification. So will the government today endorse Baroness Hanwe's bill in the other place to bring those desperate families back together?
The right honourable gentleman raises an important issue, and he will be aware that this government, this country, has done a huge amount, particularly in the region, but also here at home, to help refugees from countries such as Syria. We've expanded the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme, so we make sure our doors continue to remain open to people who most need our help. And in particular, we work very closely with the UNHCR to identify and refer the most vulnerable refugees. That is the most sensible humanitarian way we can help these very desperate people. And can I also say, since I assume this is his last question, I suspect as leader of his party, can I wish him a fond farewell from that job and say that I'm delighted that the Liberal Democrats have taken so seriously the government's Fuller Working Lives strategy, which is about providing more jobs for older workers, and that they are about to skip a generation in their leadership.
Shailesh Vara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the recent G20 meetings, the Prime Minister had excellent and constructive trade discussions with the leaders of India, China, Japan and America, which collectively represent 43% of the world's population and 6 times the population of the European Union. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that this demonstrates the potential for a prosperous and positive future for Britain post-Brexit, and it really is time for the pessimists to look at the cup being half full rather than half empty?
I'm happy to endorse my honourable friend's approach, and just to emphasise to him and the House that it's really important to do both. We need a good trade deal with the European Union. It is still a hugely important trading partner for us, but also we need to take the opportunity to strike trade deals with economies around the world, not just currently advanced economies, but those that are growing very fast as well. That's the route to future global prosperity for this country.
Judith Cummins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've had 2 general elections where the government has promised investment for the Northern Powerhouse, and yet again, within weeks, they U-turn on the Trans-Pennine electrification. Is the £1 billion deal with the DUP to keep the PM in power being funded at the expense of investment in Bradford and the North?
No, not at all. The money that has gone for infrastructure in Northern Ireland is richly needed there. We have signed, for example, city deals in England, Scotland and Wales, but none yet in Northern Ireland. And I would hope, I mean, she is right about the importance of the Northern Powerhouse, and we will continue with that programme, which is hugely important. And as she's already heard in this session, what we see is unemployment falling consistently in the north of England as a sign of how the economy in that part of England is going as well as anywhere else in the country, and we are determined to continue that.
Mr. Speaker, I know that the First Secretary will be delighted to see that Parliament Square now displays every flag of every British overseas territory to welcome the King of Spain this week, including the flag of Gibraltar. Would he ask my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to remind the King of Spain that Gibraltar is British and their sovereignty will remain paramount?
I'm happy to assure my honourable friend that the government's position on Gibraltar and the primacy of the wishes of its inhabitants, which are overwhelmingly to stay British, will be respected by the government.
McFadden. Mr. Speaker, what assessment has the government made of the effect on radiotherapy for cancer patients of its decision to withdraw from Euratom, given that the Royal College of Radiologists said this week that 500,000 scans a year are done using imported radioisotopes and that thousands of patients could be affected by this decision?
I am genuinely, again, happy to answer this question because it is a very important issue and there has been some unnecessary worry caused to cancer patients by speculating on this. Let me set out the position. The import or export of medical radioisotopes is not subject to any particular Euratom licensing requirements. Euratom places no restrictions on the export of medical isotopes to countries outside the EU, so after leaving Euratom, our ability to access medical isotopes produced in Europe will not be affected. So I hope that clears up, and I hope that reassures cancer patients around the country that the scaremongering that's going on is unnecessary.
Order! So, PMQs without the Prime Minister comes to an end. It was only, what, about 43, 44 minutes today, so short by recent standards, so still longer than usual half hour. Emily Thornberry, who was standing in for Jeremy Corbyn, went largely, almost entirely indeed, on the negotiations over Brexit, beginning with what will happen to the Irish border, then asking questions about whether this no deal was still an option. And Damian Green, standing in for the Prime Minister, did his best to reply to these, also kept on going on about, although he wasn't asked about it, but the recent unemployment figures, because they're down, so I guess that's what he wanted to talk about. And then we moved on to whether there was a Treasury assessment on the cost of a no deal on Brexit, if that was to happen. And apparently there's something coming out tomorrow from the Office for Budget Responsibility on fiscal risks. So that was the exchange. It was quite lively. It was actually probably more lively than it usually is. Emily Thornberry seemed to be enjoying herself. And then I guess Mr. Green in the end seemed to be enjoying himself too. What did our viewers make of it?
Well, the viewers broadly agree with that assessment, okay. Andrew, you'll be delighted to know. Connor Boyle said Emily Thornberry has a bit more charisma than Jeremy Corbyn, and she's very quick on her feet, tackling a defenceless Damian Green, who couldn't answer a single one of her questions, which is a pity, because on issues like the Irish border and the no-deal possibility, we need answers. Alan McInnes says, though, extremely impressed with Damian Green, passionate and on the ball. He showed the Labour lot up. David said, why are Labour fixated on failure and why would we share our contingency plans at the start of EU negotiations? Ian Linney says anything is better than being in the EU because being in the EU means we are no longer an independent country. Simples. Ian Linney from the New Forest. And Philip says, this is so much more fun than the usual Prime Minister's questions. Please, Theresa and Jeremy, take more time off.
very well.
So he enjoyed it, didn't
yeah,
he? Well, good for you, Philip.
very well. OK, we'll put a word in for him. What are your thoughts, Laura?
I thought that emailer was going to say anything was better than Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, because, you know, as we've commented,
It's a point of view.
It's not, for either of them, it's not their sort of natural habitat.
No.
And I think today we did see both of them, both very experienced at the dispatch box, actually really enjoying themselves, you know, having a go at on the big day, if you like. I don't think the exchanges necessarily got us anywhere in terms of news, apart from Damian Green holding out, which we didn't know about, that tomorrow the Office for Budget Responsibility will publish a not very interesting sounding paper on fiscal risk. However, potentially that means we are going to get a whole independent assessment of the various different outcomes of whatever happens with Brexit.
Well, are we? What's this paper about?
Well, you'll have to wait and see.
No, I'm not asking. I've been around long enough to know not to ask you what's in it.
Yes.
I might as well put my head against a brick wall. But what's it about? What ground is it going to cover?
Well, what I can tell you is when the OBR has published these fiscal risk reports in the past, they look at, you know, for example, the impact of an ageing population. They look at pressures on healthcare and the various long-term factors that may impact tax receipts.
So what will this one look at?
Well, this will look at the long-term factors that will have an impact on tax receipts and spending pressures. So,
including Brexit, will that be factored in?
To be honest, I haven't seen the report, so I don't know what they're saying about the Brexit scenarios and so on. But I mean, certainly the last report, you know, very striking about, you know, some of the demographic pressures that we face as a country. Actually, a good reminder that we do have to think about public finances.
And remember too that while Emily Thornberry asked the government for an assessment of what a no-deal scenario would cost, the Treasury actually already did that during the referendum campaign. Now, that suggestion then...
It's a highly political Treasury report.
Political Treasury report, and it put the number from memory at 60 billion, were we to crash out. I think it was 60 billion over a 5-year period. But that's from memory without double-checking it again. But as you say, any set of statistics that are put forward in this current context are highly political in terms of how they're interpreted. Yeah. But if the OBR comes out with numbers, they are an independent organisation, and those could be numbers that therefore have an impact in this debate. And where Emily Thornberry was absolutely onto something is if you do look at all the remarks of cabinet ministers in the last couple of weeks about the path that these negotiations are going to follow, there is obviously publicly a range of opinions of how they should do. And of course, that is a huge underestimate of what the differences are behind closed doors.
Well, let me come back to David Gork and then Jack Dromey. I know you want to do a deal. I know you want to get the best possible deal for the country. That is the government's aim. I understand that. But is it still government policy that no deal would be better than a bad deal?
Yes, as Damian set out in PMQs, it would be clearly no deal is bad news. But if we were faced with essentially a kind of punishment deal, then we need to be in a position to walk away. And it doesn't make any sense to go into a negotiation and say, you know, whatever happens, in the end, we will sign up. That immediately weakens our position, and we have to prepare for this. We have to be, you know, willing to walk away. But I'm not going to pretend for one moment that that is a good outcome for the country, but it might not be the very worst outcome.
In these negotiations, what are Labour's red lines?
Well, crucially, if I can give a practical example from my own constituency, we have the Jaguar plant in Erdington. We've heard about the unemployment figures today. We've got 6th highest unemployment still in Erdington of anywhere in Britain. The Jaguar plant has doubled in size to 3,000. World-class success story. But as the chief executive, Ralph Speth, a deeply impressive man, has said, crucially, we need access to the single market. Yeah? And if we are denied that, if there's tariff barriers erected, we sell fewer cars, we make fewer cars, and that will mean fewer jobs in an area still of high unemployment. So to contemplate for one moment walking away without a deal, I think is utterly irresponsible.
Right, but what I meant by red lines is not what you hope to achieve in negotiations. You've just told me what you hope to achieve, which would be zero tariff trade in cars, for example. I understand that. Everybody seems to want that. What I'm asking you is, what would be unacceptable in a negotiation? What would you regard as unacceptable, as a red line that you could not accept?
Well, one thing we've made clear, for example, is on another issue, is that what we would never accept is a diminution of rights here in Britain, and therefore that does raise some very difficult questions of access to mechanisms to enforce rights. But it comes back...
No, what would you... That's not a red line out, with respect. Rights for workers post-Brexit will be a matter for the Parliament across the road. That way will be determined there, and you will argue your case, and others maybe put a different case. What would you... Let me try and help you. If the demand remained as a €100 billion divorce settlement, would that be a red line? Would you refuse?
It'll be a tough negotiation. The idea of paying 100 billion, I think, would not be acceptable to the British people. Conversely, let's recognise this. If you take, for example, the transition period between now and when the 2-year period ends, we have obligations that we have to meet under treaty as they stand.
No.
Might there be? No, answer to your question. Might there be continuing payment into the European Union as part of a deal around, for example, access to the single market? Yes. £100 billion? No.
You see, the reason I'm asking is that there could be an election in the autumn. Yes. I mean, Labour wants an election in the autumn. You want to get one as quickly as possible. So, and the Brexit negotiations are now underway.
Yes.
So we do have a right now to know what your negotiating position will be. Not just the government's, of course we have a right to know but we have a right to know yours. And so we have a right to know what you would regard as lines you would not cross if Europe was demanding certain things. Well, and it's quite difficult to work out what they are.
Well, except, unlike the government, to say the least, been very difficult indeed to decipher exactly what they're saying, not least because it changes from one day to the next.
But I'm asking about you.
From one day to the next. Well, no, we've set out very clearly what we need to be able to do, and I've given a practical example of it, which is absolutely vital to the economic prosperity of this country.
That's the government's position as well.
And so there will be a tough negotiation at the next stages. But what we are not going to do is to contemplate for one moment that somehow it's like a council of despair, that somehow we might eventually walk away from the table with no agreement whatsoever, isolated with all the economic and other consequences that will flow.
So there's no possible deal, no matter how bad, that you would walk away from?
No. If we form a government, we will negotiate hard for a good deal.
But that's what they're doing.
For a good deal for Britain.
Right, but you would never walk away.
What we will not do is, by the way, Andrew, I was a negotiator for 30 years. The idea that you go into a negotiation of this kind, incidentally led by a weak and divided government.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out your position.
The idea that you go into a negotiation of this kind and you say, oh, by the way, what we might do is just walk away.
Well, that's what trade unions do all the time. If we can't do a deal, we'll go on strike.
Well, the negotiations I've always conducted with employers.
That's what you did when you were a trade union leader.
What you do is you seek to establish a common interest, and there is a common interest between ourselves and the European Union. What we've had is confused, mixed messages.
Right. You see, I ask you about Labour, and all you do is attack the Tories. Let me come to the
rhetoric from the Tories, but they don't know what they're doing.
Jack Dromley introduced an interesting idea there as part of the Brexit bill, which is that we would pay for continuing access to the single market. Is that the government's policy or not?
What we've said in terms of payments is the days of vast contributions to the EU budget would be over.
But would we pay for continued access to the single market?
Well, in terms of the negotiations and what we're going to do, we've set it out in the Lancaster House speech, and what the Prime Minister said there. We're not going to do, vast contributions.
No, you said that twice, and I'm not asking you. But would we pay? And I don't mean for special things like the Erasmus and all the rest. As a principle, are we prepared to pay a sum of money to have continued access to the single market for goods and services?
Well, I think what we do want to do is have access.
No, I know that, Minister.
But I'm not going to...
Just give me an answer so I can move on.
Andrew, I'm not going to negotiate here.
I'm just asking a principle. Jack Dromley raised a principle. It seemed that Labour would be prepared to pay some continued access, continued fee to get full access. I've asked you 3 times. I've not got an answer.
And you're quite right to ask that question, because ministers have never, ever ruled it out. They've been asked lots of times. It was one of the first questions that we actually asked the Prime Minister on her first foreign trip. We were on the plane to China. She very deliberately did not rule it out back in September last year. And I think, therefore, it is reasonable to surmise from that it is something that might be an option.
Because the Norwegians and the Swiss kind of pay in different ways.
And there
for
is,
that,
of course,
don't they?
increasing
Yes.
chatter, particularly during a transitional period,
All right.
about whether realistically what you have to do is reach for the kind of arrangement that other countries have, and therefore that could involve paying a fee. But look, who knows? This is all.
Who knows? And we'll have another, what, 18 months? I mean, I can hardly
March
wait.
19, the giant clock.
Just
behind
going
you.
round in circles. I
Isn't it?
sometimes feel myself coming round the other way. Laura, we'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Only one more Prime Ministers before the summer
No,
recess.
what shall we do through the summer?
Well,
Lie
don't
down.
you worry.
There'll be plenty to do.
Don't you worry.
Glass of wine.
I don't think you'll be putting your feet up just yet.
That's all, folks.